and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Kenny McBride. And joining me this morning, well this afternoon actually, are Stuart McMillan MSP and Ken McDonald from the iScot magazine. How are you, gentlemen?
Fine, thank you.
Excellent. Well, thankfully you are both fine. Our first story today is on the coronavirus. This virus, which emerged in Wuhan, China, just a week or two ago, we've had 5 suspected cases in Scotland. All 5 did test negative, but the virus is reported to be growing in strength and transmissibility, and we've also discovered that the symptoms present after the virus becomes transmissible, meaning that people could be walking around giving it to other people without even knowing that they have it, which obviously presents a major concern. China has shut down several cities and provinces to inter-province travel as a way of trying to control this, as well as this massive 1,000-seat hospital that they've thrown up just in 6 days. So, Stuart, what's your feeling on this? Do you think there's a risk to the world here, or do you think this is something that's been overblown, kind of in the wake of things like SARS that gave us all such a scare a few years back?
I think clearly there is a huge concern, and quite rightly so. And the Chinese authorities were criticised as well for the delay in actually coming forward with this and making people aware, making the world aware. Their actions over the course of the last week and a half to 2 weeks clearly have been very dramatic, to say the least. And obviously they are taking this seriously, and elsewhere across the globe are obviously taking it seriously as well. But I think it's probably too early to say in terms of the overarching effect that it's going to have upon the globe. But the fact that, well, the actions over the course of the last week and a half certainly have been startling, and it's not something that I don't recall this happening when SARS came out a number of years ago. So it's certainly something that we all have to be very vigilant on. Clearly, the authorities here in Scotland are very much that way. It also seems to be the case elsewhere within the UK. But no one can take this lightly. Have to be very vigilant and take any precautions that are required to be taken, and also have to be extremely careful.
Mm-hmm. And Ken, this is this has happened at the time of the Chinese New Year, when obviously a lot of people are travelling into China, travelling around China, visiting family and whatnot. So it could hardly have come at a worse time, really.
Well, I suppose it's just because of the size of the population within China and the fact that people are travelling. A pandemic is quite possible, but on the other side, compared to 1918 when we had the flu pandemic, which killed apparently more people than actually died during the war, they didn't have social media, and they didn't have hygiene awareness as we do have nowadays. So hopefully with a PR battalion of people putting out information about what you shouldn't be doing, having hygiene. I mean, yesterday I was in Partick and I saw some Asian people with masks on, medical masks, which I don't know whether it's to, not alarm other people, but certainly sensible things like washing your hands as well as you can do, looking after your own. And I realise that this virus apparently is only a dangerous thing to those that are infirm as well. I mean, any normal, healthy person will suffer from it, but they certainly won't be a fatality. But certainly these things can get well out of control if it's not jumped upon.
Yeah, I mean, it's something like a flu, both in terms of the symptoms and in the effects. As you say, it's a risk to people who are compromised in some other way. As far as we can tell, at least, it's not a direct threat. Although you mentioned the face masks, I heard that the Wuhan government had been demanding that people wear face masks right after Beijing has just been telling people in Hong Kong, actually, no, face masks are illegal.
Well, face masks in Japan, it's quite common for people to wear face masks because of the if you've ever been in a Japanese subway train, I mean, you know fine well that you are cheek to jowl with people. So it's very easy to be contaminated with anything that's tagging about. So they have a sense of awareness for other people. I think the Chinese will be exactly the same, and hence the reason why they will take precautions to make sure it doesn't spread as bad as it could. But will it become a pandemic? Just time will tell.
Yeah, we will obviously keep an eye on that. But as we speak about air quality, Climate change is back in the news again, as it really should be all the time. The Climate Change Committee report came out this week talking about what Britain and Scotland need to do in order to avert the worst effects of climate change. One of the key recommendations was planting at least 100 million trees per year across the UK. Scotland, of course, planted 22 million trees on its own in 2018-19. So Scotland, again, is somewhat ahead of the curve, but clearly there's still a huge amount to do. There was talk in the report about different management of the land, things like not burning on grouse moors and restoring peatlands and all these kind of things. And Stuart, so in the Scottish Government, do you get the feeling that there is more that we can do and more that is in the works?
I mean, clearly, what the Scottish Government have done since we came into power in 2007, since the SNP came into power, has been leading. We have led the way in the world of leading legislation and continually examining what further actions, what more we can actually do to actually help society and help the climate. But there is always more that can be done. Technology changes all the time. New techniques change all the time. So if any government or for any political hue, if they were to sit back and think, well, we've done all we can and there's nothing more we can do, then they should be voted out of power and somebody else come in. And I thought it was actually very interesting this morning when I heard on the radio that Richard Attenborough was talking about the 5-year fixed term parliaments down in Westminster, indicating that actually that's not a positive in terms of climate change and actions to come forward. He said, I think he made the comment that it prevents longer term planning. I would actually argue against that, because at least if you have a 5-year fixed term parliament down in Westminster, then the government and all the politicians there, it gives them that space to actually make sure they put things in place, as compared to potentially maybe having an election, well, as also has been the case, every couple of years. Then everything else stopped because of the focus on Brexit. So having that 5-year period of time actually will help Westminster do what it needs to do and try to put issues on the table, try to put some solutions on the table. But as you already stated, the Scottish Government are very much already ahead of the curve. So I would hope that the UK Government actually talk to the Scottish Government, listen to the Scottish Government in terms of actions that the Scottish Government have delivered thus far.
Yeah, and Ken, we mean a lot of the time we're on this show we're complaining about Westminster not being up to speed on all sorts of issues. Do you think that maybe now, once some of the Brexit smoke is starting to clear, we might see a firmer focus on the environment?
With a Tory government? No, absolutely not. I mean, one of the biggest things that I was disappointed with was carbon capture, which was promised, or was mooted, you can correct me on that one, for Scotland, and that would have been a great asset. I mean, as you already explained, it's an evolving process. We're trying to keep the environment as it is, as it should be, and it's going to be a generational thing. You will never get to peak optimised environment, but you can keep trying your best. The Tories, frankly, I just think if they're lucky, if they get through the 5 years, is just to keep themselves going. So I certainly don't see the environment being part of the process, because they don't have any competition to close them down. So no, I don't have any faith in the government to do anything. And really, to both of you, you mentioned the idea that voters should be voting people out if they're not doing enough on this. I mean, clearly it's arguably the issue of the age. Do you feel like the public is enough aware of what's going on and concerned enough that it will be a deciding factor in future elections?
Well, yes, I do, because I see the emails that come into my inbox, and I see the letters that come into my office, and also there has been a growing number of people raising issues regarding the environment, regarding climate change, and also there are various campaigns that will take place from time to time as well. So that is only going to increase. That's not going away. And I think if you talk to most politicians, whether it's MSPs or MPs, and also some local authority councillors as well, and the issue of the climate change and the environment is something that it's not going away. More people are being vexed and concerned by the situation that the globe actually faces. But one point I will want to raise is that the Scottish Government can't fix it all, because this is a global issue. And the likes of you have the United States and President Trump pulling the US out of the Paris climate agreement. That's a huge concern. And for me, it indicated that here's such a superpower, such a global player, showing really very little interest in the issue of the age, as you just stated. So it's a global issue. But if we are leading the way, and I believe that will continue for some time to come, but others have got to step up to the plate as well.
It's not a lot long ago that Chernobyl happened, if you remember. And of course, talking about the environment, trying to get as best you can be, it's equivalent to having a pea-free swimming lane. Everybody's affected by it. And the fallout from Chernobyl got as far as Arran and beyond, in actual fact. And there was mass slaughtering, generally people don't know it, but a mass slaughtering of animals in Scotland because of the fact they'd be contaminated by this stuff. And Arran, in fact, I believe there's a cluster of cancers, which is presumed to be as a result of that fallout from Chernobyl. So it's a global thing that has to be done. The UK government you spoke about earlier, I don't think are doing enough at all anyway, but certainly we need to get the Americans, the Russians and everybody else to get their act together. But money talks, frankly.
And of course, the big chance that we'll have to influence those other governments coming up in Scotland at the end of the year with the COP summit. What do you expect the result of that to be? Do you expect everybody to suddenly go, oh, Scotland's doing this and doing very well, we can do that too?
I think Scotland's been denied a voice because Mrs Sturgeon is not allowed to go, is that right? Is that correct? She's not attending?
Well, certainly I know the Scottish Government have hired out some facilities to be involved.
Yeah, well, certainly, I mean, Scotland, as it stands, the way that I personally see it is we're fairly proactive at at least trying to do something. I mean, the first step in the long journey is just one step. At least we're making the effort to do it. Whether we succeed or not, I don't know. Whether we get the chance for our story to be told, I'm not aware of, but hopefully it will be.
And
just on that point, I think it will be quite difficult for the media to not take part of Scotland's story in terms of the environment and climate change. Because of the action, obviously with the COP26 being held obviously here in Glasgow, I think that opportunity is going to be there, and no doubt I'm quite sure that the officials and ministers in the Scottish Government will be planning as to how they can do that to get that message out. But it will be a challenge.
Will it be reported as a good story?
Well, that's another matter.
I'm sure it will be here.
Indeed.
So anyway, I mean, you mentioned Donald Trump there, the man who famously believes that climate change is a Chinese hoax designed to bring down the American economy. A man who clearly watches a lot of telly, but not very much of the Weather Channel. So he has, our next story is about Trump. His impeachment trial began in earnest this week. It's fundamentally an argument between lawyers at this stage, given that the Senate rather, decided that they wouldn't be hearing from witnesses, which makes it a rather unusual trial. They're now arguing that no crime was committed and therefore impeachment is invalid, which is constitutionally false, and the opposite of what Alan Dershowitz and Ken Starr argued about Bill Clinton, rather. But this trial, I mean, it seems very much like it's going to be, at best, a show trial. Republicans are openly saying that they're not going to be fair jurors, they're not going to be impartial, that they're working with the White House to manage the whole process. What does this tell us about the state of American democracy just now?
That's the $1 million question. Thanks very much.
I try my best.
I've had a few American interns in the past, and we always have a good discussion about politics in the different states that they come from, but also at the federal level. And there clearly has been many concerns raised about the aspect of politics in the states. The fact that you've got someone like Mr. Trump who became president, and that for me, it probably kind of throws up a number of questions as to, well, how could people actually vote for this individual? But then the likes of this impeachment taking place at this point in the year. Also, the US presidential elections take place later in the year. I think you just used the phrase there of a show trial. I generally believe that's what it is. This is just one of the political tools that's been used in preparation for the election later this year. Because of the numbers in the Senate, the president's he's going to win. Yeah. He's going to come out with this, he'll win. On one hand, that will certainly embolden his supporters, but whatever the information that's going to come out in the intervening period, that may or may not have a damaging effect upon him when it gets to the presidential election.
Yeah, I mean, Ken, the president is still doing relatively well in polls. 44% of voters approve of his job performance against 50% disapproval. I mean, there's hardly anything in that. And his stewardship of the economy, 56% say they're happy with that, which more often than not is one of the key deciding factors in an election.
Yeah.
And at this point, this is in the middle of we've got the Iowa caucuses happening a week on Tuesday, and we've got Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, all stuck in Washington, unable to campaign.
Yeah.
There's actually only one out of the 8 or 9 viable candidates who are actually campaigning in Iowa just now. It does seem like this is going to have a pretty huge effect on the whole political process. But do you have any idea how things might shake out?
Well, I travel to America fairly regularly and yet to meet and talk to people in general about politics. And one thing that I would say is never underestimate the lowest common denominator. Okay, America is big, and I mean big, big, big. So we have people that haven't even left the country or haven't even left their state because they have no need to. They exist within their own confines and are quite happy to do so. I remember seeing a statement that only 4% of the Soviets, at the time when the Soviet Union existed, only 4% had passports, implying that, my God, they're obviously restrictive and not letting people travel. But the comparison was apparently only 4% of Americans have passports. Yeah. And a colleague of mine said when he lived in Texas, he can put his foot down in his car and drive for 14 hours solid, and he still hasn't left Texas, travelling at 70 miles an hour. So they don't get a lot of information from out with their own area, and a lot of them are, with greatest respect, because I love the country, politically ignorant of what's going on around them. And they believe what they hear, and they're limited. Well, they've got lots of TV channels, but very few that are actually giving any information rather than just selling stuff online. So Trump's getting away with it. I don't think he'd get away with it in any other European country that are more social media savvy. They do have social media in America, but they're very much polarised. Any criticism at all of the president, for a lot of people, it's pretty much punched in the jaw there and then. They just don't accept it. So what's going to happen? He'll get found out at some point. He's a moron. I mean, the guy, I just can't be any plainer than that. The guy is a pure and simply a moron, and he thinks he gets away with half this stuff while the world is actually laughing at him. And now we have an emboldened Tory government that suddenly realises we're having a slice of that. And hence why we're not seeing this Russian report that's supposed to have come out before the election and slightly after the election. That'll be hidden away. You'll never get to see that again. So people are beginning to get a bit more fascist, and Donald Trump excels at it. Yeah,
this effect that Trump's had on the rest of the world, it does seem that people like Boris Johnson, Erdogan and various others have all been emboldened by Trump's successes. Do you think that's something that's going to continue to be a problem, or do you think there are balances, measures that we can take here that can kind of prevent us going too far down that road?
I think sadly, looking at history, there tends to be this cyclical nature of politics and of nations. And I think where we are at the moment, we're obviously in a space where we don't want to be. But I think that will unfortunately continue for a period of time to come, and then an event will happen that will then actually wake people up to actually, well, what have I done? Why did I vote that particular way, or why did I decide that particular thing? So I think where we are at the moment, I think that's sadly we're going to be that way for probably a number of maybe 2, 3, 4 years or so to come. But I think certainly what happens in America later this year with the presidential election. I mean, if Mr. Trump is re-elected, then I think that position will continue certainly for at least 4 years. So it would be nice for the Democrats to get their act together, get somebody who's going to be strong, get someone who actually is going to be credible, who can defeat Mr. Trump in that election. And I think that that could be a good catalyst to start that change that's required to bring the world back into a more kind of central position to move societies forward.
And just bringing it back to Scotland a wee bit, Scotland has managed to escape a lot of this rise of the right that's been seen, I mean, across Europe, in the US, in parts of South America, in all over the world, really. What do you think is different in Scotland that has stopped that happening? I mean, even UKIP, who are not necessarily as far right as, say, the Front National in France, but they have never really had a presence in Scotland, never had a meaningful presence in Scotland. Going even further back, we never had the BNP really gaining any traction in Scotland. What do you think is different here?
Fundamentally, the people and people's attitudes towards politics and to the politicians. Now, the BNP, their vote increased at the European elections in 2015, and I was quite surprised by the number of votes they got, but also UKIP's vote increased. I mean, they get somebody elected in Scotland, and that was just a shock. I just did not see that coming, and so I think that actually helped shape the other politicians and other parties to maybe kind of look at the language, but also be more bolder against that type of politics and that type of narrative that was beginning to permeate. Also, elsewhere within the UK, it's been a different situation regarding UKIP and also the Brexit Party. So, but fundamentally in Scotland, it's about the people. I mean, we've got a different outlook in life. We've got a different outlook. We actually want to. We do care. We do care about people. We actually want to make people's lot better. Want to make society better. And as compared to that kind of far right position and that extreme position of it's all about them and have a particular grouping of individuals or a number of individuals who are the scapegoats for any ills that actually permeate in society.
And Ken, do you have any thoughts on that issue?
We're a more tolerant society in Scotland, and we've been dumped on, for want of a better word, for the past 300 years, that we've never really been able to control our destiny the way that most people would feel. Whereas down south, they believe that they are the English exceptionalism, so they tend to get a bit more upset if things are happening. Hence the reason why we're getting Brexit. That just our mindset's totally different. So anything that happens, we tend to joke first in Scots about, like, that idiot standing up for so and so is never going to get anywhere. And it's because of that tolerance. I think the fact that we've kind of we're more civic in our approach. We welcome foreigners, for want of a better word. Whereas the United Kingdom calls them expats. We realise that we are foreign in somebody else's country, we tend to behave. So I think it's just tolerance, purely and simply it's tolerance and a sensible attitude to knowing what's going on, rather than thinking that Johnny foreigners are the ones that's taking our job.
Well, on that note, we move on to talking about Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson this week, there's been some criticism of the idea that his partner, Carrie Symonds, has been influencing him. So this is specifically in relation to the proposed badger cull across England that's been happening across England for some time now. Reportedly, Carrie Symonds has been in Boris's ear, telling him that this is a bad idea, and there has been some decisions to scale back the cull that seem to have come from Number 10. This has launched a wee bit of a discussion about the advisors that are close to Boris Johnson generally. I mean, we've talked several times on this show about Dominic Cummings and others. What do you think is going on in Number 10? We've heard about a kind of loyalty being required of the cabinet. We've heard him threatening the cabinet if they don't get their acts together in the next few weeks. They're going to be out on their ears, and it has at least seen a bit less leaking from the cabinet, as far as we can tell, since the election. How big a problem is it that Boris Johnson is apparently centralising this power, and what about these advisors that he's got around him?
First of all, his partner, I have to remember that she did work for the Conservative Party as was it a researcher or special advisor or in some role in the past. So she's probably just undertaking that role, but in a different setting now.
More hands-on.
But in a different setting now, and I just think it's probably not a surprise. Mm-hmm. Sadly, it's not a surprise. And then you mentioned there regarding the issue of loyalty. Look at me, Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, here's somebody who spent his political life rebelling against his own party, but then when he became leader of his own party, he demanded that loyalty towards him. And Mr. Johnson he probably didn't rebel as much as Jeremy Corbyn, but he was very much of that ilk as well. Mm-hmm. But then now demanding that absolute loyalty. Yeah. But the fact he's now got such a majority in the Commons, then he can demand that all he wants, and he will get it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I thought also pre the election, obviously all the Conservative candidates had to sign this pledge regarding we will support basically leaving the European Union. Mm-hmm. So he set his stall out very early in that particular aspect, and he's delivering what he set his stall out to be, and sadly that will continue. But the issue of the advisors is something that it comes up in every single government. It doesn't matter who's in power in terms of the power of special advisors. But advisors are really important. They're crucial to providing that information to the government and to prime ministers, to first ministers, etc. But are there any checks and balances and controls placed upon them? Mm-hmm. And that's the worry I've got regarding what's going on down in Westminster.
Yeah, Ken, I mean, this idea of, we heard it before with like Thatcher's kitchen cabinet. It was just a select group who got to make the real decisions, and cabinet was almost just rubber stamping things. It does seem to a certain extent that it's Boris Johnson himself and maybe Dominic Cummings and maybe Gary Simmons now making the decisions, and everybody else just has to go with it. Is that something we need to worry about?
We need to worry about Boris Johnson because he is the guy that ultimately makes the decision. Advisors can advise, but you don't necessarily need to accept the advice. Mm-hmm. I mean, the advice given to the American president about carrying out bombing strikes was something they didn't actually think he was going to do, but they were giving him from the extreme to the reasonable, and he chose the worst scenario ever, which shocked the guys, I believe, at the time that put it forward, thinking it wasn't going to be as daft as to do that, to bomb this guy. So Boris Johnson is of the ilk. It wouldn't surprise me if he demanded Nicola Sturgeon come down to London and pledge allegiance to the state, because he is that kind of guy that can get what he wants done. He wants nobody standing in his way. He wants to pick the guy who's going to be the Governor General of the BBC and the Associates. He wants to be involved in that process. He is making sure that every button he presses is going to be in his favour. So I'd be seriously worried about him. He's like an intelligent American president, if I can say it, American Trump, but no, he's probably cannot believe how much he's getting away with.
Yeah.
I honestly believe he's surprised that the country's allowing it to happen.
And yet it is. So, we will obviously keep an eye on Boris Johnson. You have to keep a very close eye on him, unfortunately. But on another note of Westminster's competence, we're hearing more reports about HS2 costing more and more and more. The bill could be as high as £106 billion compared to the latest Department for Transport estimates of between £65 and £88 billion. This has been an ongoing thing since before the independence referendum. We talked about this and how much it was going to cost and how much Scotland would have to pay for it versus really getting virtually no benefit out of it. And now the cost has gone up, the delays will increase, and we're still not sure that this is ever going to deliver what was promised. Stuart, what is wrong with the UK that we just don't do very well at these major infrastructure projects?
I think first of all on HS2, it was clear that the budgeting at the very outset was way low. It was far too low, and for me that was really just about just trying to get it through to get the public support. Yeah. Absolutely. Now it's an unfair comparison I'm about to put on the table, but I will do it nonetheless. When the Scottish Parliament building was being built, that was also obviously £40 million. That was also never going to be achievable. Mm-hmm. And also other things happen in society, and then changes happen to the building, and so on and so forth. But it was never going to be enough. But on this, the scale of this, the amount of money that's actually going to be involved in this is just astronomical. And to be honest, it's obscene how much is going to get spent on this. When you consider, across the UK, the amount of poverty that's there, the amount of child poverty, the amount of desperation that's there, and the policy of universal credit, and how that's actually made life worse for so many people. Anytime anywhere universal credit has came in, the Trust will continually, they'll put the reports out, and regularly the figure is about 35% increase in people going to food banks as a consequence of that one policy. So for the UK government to spend so much money on this, and if they were to continue with it, I'm quite sure that the 106 billion will actually still be less as compared to what the final bill will actually be. So I think there comes a point where the UK government have got to take that decision in terms of do they cancel it or do they progress with it? Because the value for money and the return on that particular investment, there is no way they will ever get that money back. No way. So
there's a convenient way of getting people into work in London. So London's losing a lot of people. Certainly the property prices are causing a problem of getting staff to work in there because you have to live miles away. This is a further extension of that. You know, live somewhere 2 hours on a train, travel backwards and forwards, and keep the city going. So I don't see anything how Scotland can benefit from this in any shape or form unless they're building 90% of the product, which they're not. So it's more or less Greater London project that helps them survive, nothing else.
Yeah, can I come in just on that point? I worked down in London a number of years ago. I worked for the SNP down in Westminster. Yeah. And I remember talking to somebody at the time, and this individual actually lived in Yorkshire, and they commuted every day,
really,
up and down to London.
Flying?
No, train.
Yeah.
So I just thought, well, that's a ridiculous situation for anyone to be in. But the likes of this, obviously, this is to help the London economy. Yeah. But you then kind of have to ask the question as well, in terms of the Northern Powerhouse and what Prime Minister Johnson is indicating in terms of investment to go into the north of England. They can't put the amount of 106 billion into this and also put the money into helping the northern economy. It's not going to happen because that money's not there. Yeah. And the UK is already up to its eyeballs in debt. And that, if they continue with these, that's only going to continue. And then that builds up that financial burden and that noose around the neck of the economy for decades to come.
Yeah, part of the rationale for HS2 was to connect the north better, the north of England, obviously. Yeah. It doesn't come anywhere near the north of Britain, but that section now is being kind of on the chopping block. So that effectively, as you said, it's effectively just going to make Birmingham into a dormitory town for London.
Well, first thing, London's a city-state. Nobody's going to compete with it. They make sure of that. And we had an article going back about a year ago in Presswick, how specifically Westminster had said absolutely no way is Presswick, at the time before we had digital landing software, no way was Presswick allowed to become a dominant player in the aviation market because London Heathrow was always going to be first. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the time savings for all that is apparently 25 to 30 minutes saving. So, I mean, trains regularly get delayed, and you think, why would you pay all that money to save 30 minutes? It just doesn't make sense. So to me, the only thing it can be primary is to serve the importation of staff from the outer regions into the centre of London, and that's it.
Yeah, so just very quickly, yes or no, do you think we will ever see HS2 completed?
No.
I hate my doubts.
Okay. Well, the biggest story we've been talking about for the last 3 years has been Brexit. And this week, the Withdrawal Agreement Act was finally passed at Westminster, meaning that we will now be leaving the EU at the end of this week. This is, as I say, a long time coming, but it is now finally happening. Ian Blackford spoke in Parliament this week and described the passing of the bill as a constitutional crisis. This bill has not had legislative consent from Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. It's the first time in history that has happened. And yet there seems to be very little concern about that issue. There was an incredibly dismissive article in The Independent yesterday, I think, basically saying, well, yeah, it's a constitutional crisis, but nobody cares. So nobody cares what Scotland thinks, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, I'm not even quite sure where to go into this, but what's your feeling on what's happened just this week with Brexit? I mean, it's certainly not good news for any of us, but how are you feeling about it?
I feel terribly sad, to be brutally honest. I studied in Europe. I studied in France, Germany, and also in Sweden, and I know how important Europe actually is, certainly for the economy, for society, but certainly from a personal perspective. And I went through, I did my degree, it was through an Erasmus scheme, and then when I did my Masters, I got funding from the European Social Fund. Mm-hmm. So I know how important being a member of the European Union actually is. The fact also, the bill is passed, you're correct that the three devolved administrations and parliaments and assemblies did not support it. But it highlights once again the arrogance of the Westminster elite. That our voice doesn't matter to them. And the Welsh voice doesn't matter, and Northern Irish voice does not matter either. So this is why it's important. It's important that we continue also the campaign and raising the issue regarding independence, but also the issue as to why being a member of the European Union is so important for society and for the economy. On Friday night at 11 p.m, I'm certainly not going to be celebrating. I'll be saddened. Yeah. I will be hugely saddened by it. And I'm quite sure EU nationals who are living in Scotland, they'll be sitting there, they'll be concerned in terms of what's going to happen to them.
Absolutely.
And I'm on the Parliament's Culture, Tourism Europe External Affairs Committee. We had our first session of our next piece of work on Thursday morning, and I would encourage anyone to actually go and check the official report or check it out online. And there was an issue, a point was raised regarding the deal that needs to be signed by the end of this year. And all the panellists had suggested, well, no deal will be done. But if any type of deal will be done, it will be a thin deal, and that was a quote. Because there is so much that has to be done and dealt with, the time is just not there to do it. Mm-hmm. And also, quite cleverly, I thought that in terms of the European Union, from their perspective, one of the main issues that they want dealt with first is the issue of fisheries and access to waters. Now, we all know, obviously, the language that's been used within the UK and from the Tories and the Brexit Party regarding fishing waters. So that's going to be the first big issue that has to be dealt with. And that will not be dealt with overnight, if at all. And if it is dealt with, once again, Scottish waters will be used as a bargaining chip to get access to something else. So we were there in the 1970s, we will be there again this year.
So Ken, I mean, Stuart mentioned the effect on EU citizens. I should mention occasional host of this show and Director of EU Citizens for an Independent Scotland, Ellen Hofer, has organised this event at Holyrood on the night that Brexit actually happens, to commemorate it, and kind of taking a page out of Alan Smith's book, the idea of keeping a light on. There's going to be a wee light display. It sounds like it's going to be beautiful, if very sad, and if you are welcome to join us there if you want. We will be covering it here on Broadcasting Scotland. But Ken, what's your feeling as we come to this kind of finally getting Brexit done?
Well, we're not getting it done. We've got a date set for an event to happen. It's just despair. I'm just weary of it all. I'm just weary of this madness, this self-harm. And again, we can do nothing about it. We voted 62% to stay in the European Union, and it's a case of why not just not vote? What difference does it make? The fisheries are first to go because there's nobody who's going to be voting in that part of the planet that's going to elect any major Tory MPs. We are expendable. We are not considered. We're an afterthought. And again, part of being a tolerant society is we just seem to take it. You know, we are a punch bag for the UK government, and we don't fight back.
And we are just going to move on now, but we have a wee video clip to show you, because this idea that Brexit has just worn us down, and we've all kind of almost got used to the idea, is something that Keith Brown spoke about a year ago now. Made a speech in Aberdeen. Broadcasting Scotland was there, and it raised quite a few eyebrows at the time, but I think it's worth just having a wee look at it now. So I think we've got that video clip coming up here.
And the other thing that's worth bearing in mind is 2021, if Brexit was to happen, and we didn't go relatively soon, then the idea that Brexit might become normalised is quite a worry. People get used to it, and that's the new normal. So that, I think, I know is also in Nicola's mind. One of the things that's very important is what happens on a Section 30 order. So now, I have said, and I think Julian may have been at the group meeting when I've said it, I don't think that certainly the SNP and I don't think the Yes Movement should be willing to anticipate a refusal of a Section 30 order as a reason not to call a referendum. If we want to have a referendum, then we decide we're going to have a referendum.
So that was Keith Brown speaking in Aberdeen in February of last year, and of course we have now had a refusal of a Section 30 order. The First Minister has said that on Wednesday of this week she'll set out her next steps towards a referendum that she said will happen this year. So as a member of the First Minister's party, a close colleague, I'm sure you don't know every word she's going to say on Wednesday, but what's your feeling about the next moves for the independence movement?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to prejudge or anticipate what the First Minister will say on Wednesday, but I'll sit as a backbencher. I'll be in the chamber, I'll be speaking in the debate that will be taking place. And also, I look forward to the statement and look forward to what the First Minister is going to say. And it's clear that consistently in Scotland, whether it's in the Scottish Parliament or whether it's voting, the population of Scotland have been clear that they want to have another referendum. And the issue of the sovereignty of the population of Scotland is something that's been spoken about and dealt with and voted on in the past as well. Now, obviously, I want independence. That's why I joined the SNP some 27 years ago. I campaign for it every single day. I want us to win this referendum. I want us to win it with a substantial majority. We don't have to win every single vote, but I want us to win it with a substantial majority, because we also have to think of the situation of when we are independent. It's about bringing the country, or taking the country forward as one. And that's crucial. So when we do have a referendum, there can be no dubiety about it, and that's important for that post-independent situation. Because we hear the Tories and some from the pro-union side talking about a divisive referendum. Well, politics in any democracy, and I said this last night at the Eastwood SNP Burn Supper, politics in any democracy where there are multi-parties There's clearly going to be a bit of division there anyway because you've got different parties campaigning on different issues and campaigning at different elections. So that's actually a normal state of affairs.
Yeah, but this is just rhetoric from the other side,
Absolutely.
just trying to normalise
Correct.
divisive and separatist. And
Correct.
there was never any divisiveness talked about the European Union when they wanted that done. There were no separatists
Correct.
in the European Union, so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're right.
it's interesting that you mention moving forward as one. Rugby great Jim Telfer today has expressed his, well, it's actually in his book that's just being released, but in an interview about it, he said, "I think Scotland should stand on its own. I'm not a member of the SNP, but this idea that we have to be England is rubbish. We should stand on our own 2 feet. We can do better." And I mean, I know a lot of people in 2014, obviously this was a gross generalisation, but kind of saw the rugby establishment as heavily unionist. So for Jim Telfer to come out and say that seems quite positive. But at the same time, there's a new poll has just been released. This is saying that the Scottish Parliament basically should decide whether or not an independence referendum happens. 54% of people said the Scottish Parliament should decide. 35 said the Westminster Parliament, 12% said don't know. So that's, I mean, once the don't knows are excluded, that's almost 2/3 saying the Scottish Parliament. And there's a couple of other questions basically echoing the same thing. And this is something that's been kind of an ongoing issue around the independence debate, is that when asked about specific issues, people of Scotland overwhelmingly say that should be decided at Holyrood.
Yeah.
But in opinion polls about independence itself, we're still, it's still at best about 50-50.
Well, there's polls and there's polls, and we have, the majority of these polls are carried out by London-based parties. To assume that everything within this country is fair and reasonable is just laughable. There are reasons why things are being said. There are reasons why BBC in Scotland constantly give the lowdown that Scotland's a drug capital, it's the murder capital, it's everything else. It's just statistics are just trying to bombard you with to give you the impression that, you know what, we might as well not bother, we'll just get on with the day job and let somebody else rule us. Being treated as lodgers in our own house cannot continue any longer. Scotland needs to go its own way and blame itself for any problems. It's not going to be milk and honey, but it'll be damn close to it. We have a wonderful country. We have I'm not an SNP member, by the way, just to let you know, we have a wonderful country, and we have so many talented people that why not just let us go ahead and do it, right? And the thing is that we are needed by London. London needs the resource of Scotland to fund it, because once this European Union thing kicks in proper and they're losing companies left, right and centre, it's going to be like Maggie Thatcher 1974 all over again. They need that money to support the country. So things are going to get harder. We're going to get the, what's the comment, from Marshall Wade to martial law situation where we've now got Labour prospective candidates saying they should use the police to stop marches in
the
Scotland.
Spanish model in Catalonia.
It's
Lisa
a
Nandy, we do just like to make sure you know which candidate that was. That was Lisa Nandy suggested that Britain should take a lesson from Spain and how they handled Catalonia's independence movement.
How they handled Scots was a word that she actually used to treat them. So suddenly you realise now that the narrative is becoming harder and firmer and stronger, and the papers and the media are now falling in line. So Boris Johnson desperately wants to get involved with the decision of who's going to be in the BBC board. Should be worrying, really, really worrying. I mean, I know that the government does occasionally throw a cannonball over its bows by saying things like, I think the BBC should be self-funding, which is really get your act in order, because you know reasonably well you're never going to attract that level of funding by public subscription, not through the tax. We need to wake up and realise that we're being done. We really are. We're not doing ourselves any favour, and we are our own worst enemy. So what do? For Indiref, you have to think of your children and your grandchildren. And the interesting point about the votes here is that 45% of the people that voted against independence in the first referendum was over 55s. Now, we believe that they have a firm affinity to the UK because many of them were in the war, they've been brought up together, they stood up for the Queen at the end of the cinema. They've got emotional ties to it that they just can't see losing. And it's the younger kids today that are now in high numbers voting for independence because they've been about, they've travelled and now lost their freedom of travel, they will be certainly against this union that we have. It's going to be interesting to see how it pans out, but don't believe the polls that are reported in the newspapers, and just see for yourself when you go out and talk to people. There's more and more people talking about independence in a serious way, and none of this, what pound are you going to use or what currency are you going to use and all this other rubbish, is just doesn't make any difference. We need to start thinking positively for ourselves and start talking to people about how stop talking ourselves down.
I think just one other point on that as well, and it's folk who did vote no the last time. We need to talk to them.
Yeah.
Talk to them rationally. Don't shout at them. Don't blame them for the way they voted in 2014. So if we do that, that's just going to harden their viewpoints, their opinions. Actually, absolutely. Yeah. So we have to talk to them just to realise, well, why did you vote that way the last time? What were your thoughts, your views, your concerns, your hopes, your aspirations? What were they? And try to move them onto the yes side for this next independence referendum, because if we don't, then the 45% that we finished off on the last time, we'll probably end up finishing off the same again. Yeah. So that's why we have to have genuine dialogue, but done in such a way that it's about it's done with respect, to try to appreciate and understand, because that way, that's when we'll get people to actually come over to the yes side, and then when they come over, they will come over, and I quite believe this, they will come over in their droves, and we will win the next referendum.
I think we would have won the referendum had it not been for the case of the media in Scotland, the media at the time, with the vow. I mean, people don't buy papers, they don't buy magazines, please. Magazines. Because everything's on social media, but if you think the media is not all that important in this kind of thing, just think of what the vow did. It persuaded a lot of people that, you know what, that's a safe option, I'm going to go with that because it sounds right. Gordon Brown's pronouncements. We had an artillery battery of negative information thrown at us, and then, not to forget, the pensioners being called up saying, you better stock some beans and cat food and you're covered for the next 6 months because come Monday, you know, you're not going to get a pension. This kind of thing. So fear was played a big part, but people are now beginning to become socially aware.
Just very quickly then, Stuart. Ken mentioned the media, obviously Broadcasting Scotland and iScot magazine were created in part to try and overcome this media problem. What can the SNP do more to try and counter some of these media narratives that are getting more and more cemented into people's minds?
Generally, the social media plays such a huge part every single day in the media messaging of all parties, and I think the SNP have got to do a lot more in the social media aspect, because it's difficult to get a positive message and get that positive narrative out into the newspapers, but that's not a new thing. That's been there for the last 13 years and also beyond. So it's the other tool that's there is about any other opportunity to get that information out. But also, we've got over 100,000 members. It's about making sure that every member, and there is plenty of information there, that's the thing, there is, but it's about every member talking to people, talking to friends, talking to family, talking to colleagues, and using that information that's there to get it out directly. Because when you get that information out directly, it is harder then for the written media. Obviously, iScot excluded, of course. It's harder for the mainstream media to actually to target that and try and put some nonsense out, which they will do. But it's by talking, by the negotiations, and just having that general chat to get information over. That's how we will win the next referendum.
When the thing that needs to be pointed out is most people in our circle are interested in politics 24/7, 365. So we are involved in that kind of sphere of discussion. Many people who have the vote that carries exactly the same weight as you or I don't. They wouldn't even recognise half their MPs if they saw their photograph, because they've got a life to live and a life to lead. And these are the people we need to get to. But all the media that they're accessing, whether it be through the mainstream TV or through the papers, are all unionist fed, in which case, so there's no change of narrative for them. This is all they're getting, and they're not talking to people that they know. So why it is quite important that we have, obviously, your own organisation for people to access throughout the planet. I believe you're shown around the world. For Indie Live, for the radio broadcast, and for ourselves, the three pillars. But we are neglected by the Scottish, even the Scottish indie folk, the people that do absorb it 24/7, 365, which is a damn shame, because, okay, we're not going to compete in a like for like with Question Time or anything else in the studios here yet. But with the correct support, it will happen. And the fact is, I mean, if you plant a seed, you've got to wait a wee while before you're going to start picking cherries from it. You know, and hopefully that's going to help for us.
Yeah, this is. This is important. If you are an independent supporter and you want to have a different media narrative, then you do have to support organisations like IndieScot, like iScot magazine, like Indie Live, and like Broadcasting Scotland. Share it around on your social media. Tell your friends about it. Talk to them. Let them know that there is an alternative out there. And we can hopefully try and build that bit of momentum.
But you have to understand why it's needed. You really have to understand it. If you think that printed media is of limited value, again, remember the vow. The vow was the thing that changed our lives.
Absolutely. Well, we are just about out of time. I do just want to mention, though, tomorrow is Holocaust Memorial Day, marking 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. Obviously, the Holocaust still looms large in many of our minds. Anti-Semitism has been a big story in British politics, especially over the last few years. We've seen numerous Jewish people talking about how much anti-Semitism has risen in this country and in countries across the world. Stuart, very quickly, your thoughts on Holocaust Memorial Day?
It's something I wholeheartedly support. I went to Auschwitz a number of years ago when I was doing an interrail trip around Europe, and it was one of the most harrowing things I've ever seen and witnessed in my life. And we need to continually tell that story to younger people and existing and future generations, to make them aware of man's inhumanity to man.
Yeah. Especially as the last few survivors are now very, very old now. There is a risk that those stories will be forgotten if we don't keep them going.
We have to. There are museums that exist to show quite a harrowing thing to go and see, but we can't forget. We need to keep repeating to our children's children, what can go wrong if we allow people like, partly Adolf Hitler was a nice man and was very kind to his dog, but you know, we need to have checks and balances in place to make sure this doesn't happen again, and you know, God help the people that don't.
Yeah. And of course, to finish on a slightly lighter note, it was Burns Night this week. You were piping, I believe, at the Eastwood Burns Supper. How did that go?
It was a great night, as they always are. I think it's about the 16th time I've been there, so I was piping and did the toast to Scotland last night. It was a great night once again.
So do you have a favourite Burns line for us?
Just put me on the spot now, why don't you? No, I'm not going to embarrass myself. It's one of the things that because I'm a piper, I tend to, obviously, I pipe at quite a lot of Burns suppers on an annual basis, so
you need to know the tunes, not the words.
Yeah, indeed. I do quite like a man's a man, so I'll stick to that.
Fair enough. Ken, do you have a favourite?
Well, our strapline in the magazine is for those of independent mind. Take it from Burns, nothing to do with independence, but thinking for yourself and realising, you know, what's really happening out there. So.
Well, honestly, for me, it's to see ourselves as others see us, because the more and more I talk to people outside Scotland, the more I hear them say, how come you're not independent yet?
Yeah.
Why would you stick with this nonsense? And I think that is something that all of Scotland could do with, seeing ourselves as the country that the rest of the world see us, rather than as what you were saying about the mainstream media, the London-based media want to tell us we look like. But anyway, that is all we've got time for today. I'd like to thank both Stuart McMillan, MSP, and Ken McDonald for joining us.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for joining us as well. And as we were saying, if you want a successful independent media apparatus in Scotland, then unfortunately you do need to support it in whatever way you can. If you're able to support us financially, please go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. address at the bottom of the screen there. Your £5 a month will make such a difference. We are in preparations to expand our programming somewhat. We have been talking about for a while about developing a question time type show that we want to tour around the country. So that is in the works now. We're also in discussions about some sports broadcasting as well as various other things. There's some music shows potentially in the works. All of this can only happen though with your support. So if you are able to help, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up as a supporter. That'd be wonderful. And if you're not able to do that, don't panic. The shows will always be available for free online. You can help us by sharing those around, by telling your friends how excellent these shows are, what wonderful guests we have, what brilliant crack we have. That's the biggest thing you can do. Let people know where we are, what we do, and why we're important. That's the biggest thing you can do for us to help right now. But on that, I'd like to thank Stuart and Ken again. We will be back tomorrow night at 7. Gordon will be here with some footage from the Independence March that took place in Inverness this weekend. Unfortunately, we couldn't get our outside broadcast unit up there for that, but Gordon did have a camera with him. He did get some footage, so he'll be sharing that with you on Scotland at 7 tomorrow night. So until then, I've been Kenny McBride. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of the day.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, no, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon as our First Minister has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was a battling stone. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
About the work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.